Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dr. Paul Marciano. Grace Under Pressure is that LinkedIn Live show. We pose questions to thought leaders and doers like Paul, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a better understanding of ourselves. Grace Under Pressure focuses on what we too often dismiss as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, and the commitment we exhibit toward others. Grace for me is generosity we show, respect we give, and compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader, you bring people together for common cause and you energize them for good. Paul Marciano, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
John, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, I want to tell folks all about you. Dr. Paul is the world's leading authority on employee engagement and respect in the workplace, and he's worked in the field of human resources for over 30 years. Paul has a doctorate in clinical psychology from Yale, where he specialized in behavior modification and motivation. He's taught undergraduate and graduate courses at Yale, Princeton, Davidson on topics like leadership, industrial psych, survey development, research, and methods. And his best-selling book, Carrots and Sticks Don't Work, Build a Culture of Employee Engagement with Principles of Respect, has been translated into several languages, many accolades, and named, this is cool, one of the 100 best human resource books of all time, folks. All time, okay? Paul has a brand new book, which we will talk about today. It's called Let's Talk About It, Turning Confrontation into Collaboration. So I hope Paul didn't have me in mind when he was thinking about it, but it's a great title. I love that. Turning Confrontation into Collaboration. And as a note, Paul has noted that book has been sent to every United States senator. Let's hope they read it, eh?
Yes.
So, and Paul joins me from his 100-acre farm in a one-bridge town in Three Bridges, New Jersey. You got it, folks. He is, and I love this because I grew up with this book. He's the grandson of Ludwig Bemelmans, who was the author and illustrator of the classic children's book, Madeline. Welcome, Paul.
Oh, thank you so much for that nice introduction.
Great. And I think for all that you and I have accomplished together, we probably will not equal your grandfather's contribution to literature.
No. And one more plug, it was the American dream. He came over here at 16 years old, didn't speak the language, and ended up writing about 40 books and drawing 35 New Yorker covers. So wow. Pretty cool. Pretty cool legacy.
That's something. So, Paul, we're in the second year of our pandemic. How well the organizations that you work with coping? What are you seeing, hearing?
I think organizations are exhausted, as people are exhausted. And the way, John, that I've thought about this pandemic is, we were all like in our personal and professional lives, planes just flying along, innocently enough. And all of a sudden, this bolt of lightning struck us. And we were all over the place. Okay? And so now we've figured it out over the past year, but we're beginning to descend through the clouds, thankfully. But one of the things we're realizing is maybe the instruments aren't working like they used to, right? We've kind of lost our way a bit, and we're going to land, but we're not going to land where we took off from. And I think that companies ought to be doing a lot of thinking about how we come through these clouds and where we land. And, companies are all over the place, and individuals are having all kinds of different experiences around this. So I think, I was just off the phone with somebody who they've stayed in work the entire time. They're in Illinois. They never stopped going to work, whereas everybody else will go virtual. So I think in terms of handling it, they have figured it out, but now they've got a lot more figuring out to do as we descend.
I love the metaphor of the airplane. My son works in the airline industry and deals with this. But what did you mean by the instruments aren't working? What's the analogy to that, Paul?
Well, I think we've had some, for example, some processes, some ways of doing things, some metrics, and now those are all being called into question. Mm-hmm. Like, is that the way we're going to steer our organization going forward? Because we've seen that we've done things in terms of how we've dealt with work and people that are working in ways that we probably never could have imagined before. So we need to recalibrate, I think.
Great. Okay, good analogy. Now, let's get to your book, which I am in love with the title. Let's talk about it, turning confrontation into collaboration. What led you to write this, Paul?
Well, on a personal issue, and this is always what was in the back of my mind, is my dad and his older brother got into an argument when my dad was in his early 20s, and they never spoke again for 40 years. My only uncle passed. I never met him. I never met my first cousins. And, I think about all the dysfunction in the world that I've seen, personal and professional, in which people simply refused to have critical conversations, or they've had them and they haven't gone well. And so in a business setting, the most basic one would be a manager who is not capable of or not skilled at providing a direct report with performance feedback.
Right.
We hear that all the time. Another example which comes to mind is an office where I worked. There were 9 people in the satellite office. The business development person and the salesperson hadn't spoken in 3 months because the one left the other off an email chain. So, the thesis of my initial book is that it's all about respect.
Okay.
And that leads to engagement. And so as I looked around the world, personally, professionally, and also, of course, in our government, and taking a look at our failure to, unfortunately, our great desire, John, to make other people wrong, fundamentally.
What a great way you stated that. Our desire to make other people wrong, prove other people wrong. Yes.
Because if they get to be wrong, we get to be right.
Right. It's just a backhanded way of looking at it. Yeah. So.
I think, unfortunately, and I just think, unfortunately, we come to this world and just butting heads with each other, and there's probably different reasons for that. But I thought, boy, could it make a difference if I could help people learn the skills to have those critical conversations? I think, John, the reason that people don't have the conversations, at least a big reason, is because they don't feel competent in having them, right? So I don't go jumping out of airplanes because I don't feel competent. What if we looked at it from a skills deficit perspective? And I could teach you and have you become both competent and confident over time. Would you be more likely to engage in a conversation? And would it be more likely to be productive? And I think the answer to that is yes. And that's what drove me to write the book.
Great. And now that's very positive. But there's something that you write about, and it's called our cognitive biases. Why are they hindering us, Paul?
Well, cognitive biases are largely unconscious, and they have been, we've earned them over time through our experiences. They provide different lenses through which we view the world. And what I would ask is for those listening or watching us to imagine the following. I want you to think that there is a pot in front of you. And into that pot, you place your age, your gender, your race, whether you're a parent, your job, your level of education, where you grew up, and then put in just all your life experiences and throw your personality in. Mix it all up and pull out a pair of glasses, and you will see that you see the world in a way that is as unique as your thumbprint. No 2 people see the world in the same way. John, no 2 people are listening to us today in an identical manner. It's going through that lens of their hearing and all of those experiences. And so the unconscious biases that we have really serve as these filters, which then create different realities for each of us.
Okay. I'm familiar very much so, and it's been very top of mind, and I've talked on this show, the unconscious biases that we have toward in race and ethnicity. What are some other kinds of biases apart from that that we manifest, Paul?
Belief perseverance is one of them, in which we will believe despite even overwhelming evidence that's the case. And there was in the 1954 researcher called Festinger researched a group of people called the Seekers, who were convinced that the planet was going to blow up, and that God was going to save them if they were faithful enough. And so they ended up selling all of their possessions, quitting their jobs, leaving their relationships, with this belief that at the strike of midnight, the world was going to end, but the spaceship was going to come and save them. So at midnight, as you probably could have guessed, the world did not come to an end in 1954. And so what could these people have said themselves? And what they said was that they believed so fully that God forgave the world. Now that's belief perseverance.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've heard of that study, and that's actually a gentle outcome. But we're faced with it right now with the big lie and things like that. So we're all kind of meshed up in this. So, okay.
Yeah, we really are. And I think all of these contribute to just blind spots in our life.
Yes. And yeah. So anyway, so how do we overcome these biases, Paul? What are some techniques that you advise? So.
John, I think first and foremost, it's just recognizing and acknowledging them. Nobody wants to think of themselves as a racist, of course not, or biased or bigoted in some way. But the truth is there's lots of research that would suggest that we are racist and bigoted in different ways. And in fact, that we learn differences in things like skin color and such at a very young age. 2 years old, 3 years old, show affinity for people that are more like us, or people that have our skin, people that look like us. And that, I believe, it goes back to, when we're in tribes. So if you and I look alike, there's a greater sense of security than if there are people that look really differently.
Sure.
So, yeah, so there's safety. And so I think that the first thing is to just not become defensive and just say, I think about myself, really blessed. So I'm a white male born in America, who had the pleasure of the honor of having a really good education. Boy, I tell you, I see the world pretty differently, probably than a lot of other people. And I don't always remind myself of that.
Yeah. One of the seminal characters in my book, Grace, is Father Greg Boyle, who grew up in an Irish Catholic background. He founded, blanking out, Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention program in the world, actually, but it's based in East Los Angeles. And I remember an interview he gave, and he talked about, the perception is, well, why don't, quote, those people pull themselves up by their bootstraps? And
yes.
to which Father Boyle said, what boots, what straps, what boots? He said, and he talked about his own background. He said, I grew up in an intact family. He said, I couldn't have failed if I tried to. And what about children who are abandoned at birth and challenges like that? My daughter is an MSW clinician, and she works with at-risk youth. And the children are so, the odds are against them from the get-go. So that's a great challenge. So,
and I think I'll just say that too. I think for, so many of us to recognize how truly blessed we are in life, and to have empathy, empathy, if you put a list together of the traits or characteristics, I think that make for a successful human being, however you want to define that, empathy's got to rank really high.
Right. Well, that's a top of mind topic now, and we were looking for our leaders. And I'd taken an extension and see if you agree with this, that empathy is that ability to feel another one's pain, discomfort. But from a leadership perspective, I say that's not enough. A leader has to act on it to make the situation better. Would you concur with that, Paul?
Yeah, I would agree completely, John.
Okay, great. So
the question is, right, is how many leaders that I've worked with people with empathy issues. And so what's interesting is some of them will acknowledge that they're not empathetic. And then they'll get pretty educated around what that looks like, but then they're not sure how to act in the moment. So somebody is saying to me, my cat has just died. And I understand that I should have an empathetic response in the moment, but I don't know what that's supposed to be.
Yeah. That's kind of scary, actually, but I understand. No, but you're being truthful, and so that requires more training, more development, more acculturation, I would suppose. So, but also, so let's get to another, perhaps a bias or not, but because you touched on this earlier, but conflict avoidance. I once worked in an organization where they said that, we're really nice around here. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, I know a lot of people would trade places with you. And they said, no, they wouldn't. And because I call it the disease of nice, which is, as you would say, conflict avoidance, which means no one ever raised serious issues, behavioral or organizational. So tell us about this conflict avoidance.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with individual, but then also culturally. So if you're those of us that have lived in the South, it's just a very different environment. When you pass somebody on the street, you say, hello, good morning, those kinds of things. When they're small children, and when you're in a place like Connecticut, right? If you go, hi, good morning, and people clutch their children, right? So culturally, it can be very different. And I think that, and culturally, in terms of like folks from Israelis, right, culturally are known to be very confrontational in a way. So I think, when we avoid conflict, which most of us do, in a corporation, people feel that they're suppressed, right? They can't voice their opinion. So what then that happens is people get resentful. So what may occur as nice, I think, often leads to people internalizing the conflict, which turns out to be very unhealthy.
Absolutely. And that leads just to dealing with that is the work of Amy Edmondson, and which is, of course, of psychological safety, making it safe to speak up. So now so we have this conflict avoidance hovering over this. What are the mistakes that bosses make when having difficult conversations, Paul? So.
Well, I think, and I'll pull it out from the boss because I think this applies to everybody. It's these mindset issues, and the first is that it's going to be a confrontation. That's the number. If I say, I've got to meet with my employee or I'm going to meet with my team member, and boy, we're going to go at it. You can imagine it's almost like putting on a suit of armor, right? And choosing your weapon. We're going to have a confrontation. Yeah. Now, if you go into a meeting with that mindset, it's going to, of course, make the other person defensive and reactive. And we're going to have a way different way of being. And the other person is going to have a way different way of being than if we come into this and say, John, there's an issue that, is concerning to me. And I'd really like to have a conversation about it and get your thoughts. So I think the first thing is this mindset issue. And there are a couple of those. I think the others are there's right and wrong thinking. The truth is the right and wrong thinking. You're right, I'm wrong. Listening without a preconceived bias, right? Because we always have a way of listening. John, when the phone rings and it's just that person in your life, it could be whoever. And you see those digits come up, and oh God, yeah, I don't want to pick the phone up.
Yeah. Well, there's a great New Yorker cartoon, Bob. I want to say Makoff is his most famous cartoon. He was the longtime editor there, but he picks it up, and the line is, and he said, "Lunch? How about never? Is never too soon?"
No, that's great. But a great example is you can imagine you're somebody ringing and saying, what are you doing? And that what are you doing can come across as supportive or accusatory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Aren't you being a little nosy, Paul? So.
Right. It has to do, I made up a bias writing the book, which is called personal historical bias, right? Because it's how we have always related to other people. And so we have this listening of others. And I think that again, if you and I have had confrontation before, we've argued, we've disagreed, that's the listening I'm going to have of you.
Right.
So a couple other things just in terms, I think, that promote collaboration are, assuming that you don't have all the facts. In fact, I like, John, a way to begin a conversation is, John, let me tell you what I know about the situation, and please let me know if I'm missing something or I've got something wrong.
Good.
Right.
Well, yeah, open heart. And getting back to your top, because you are the expert in respect, I define it very simply as looking at someone with an open heart and assuming the best intentions. Is that correct?
I love that. I love that. I'll tell you a story, John. I think you and I obviously don't know each other well, but I appreciate you being on the show. But here's something I know you're going to like. I was at a workshop many years ago, and it was being conducted by a monk. And at the end of it, he pointed to everybody in the room, looked at each of us individually, and he said, here's what I know about each of you. And that is, you're getting along in the world the best way you know how. And I just think that is so true,
Right.
and sadly, I think we often make the kind of the worst interpretations of people.
Well, and that's why I cotton down to your idea of the historical perspective, and that's where we need respect. If you report to me, Paul, and I know you're a whiner, or I assume that you're a whiner, you're coming to my office and you're going to whine about something, So I have to really, to drop that bias, I have to say, okay, I'm going to have to look at Paul. He's going to make a case and I'm going to listen. Is that correct or what? So.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. And look, all of this is practice, right? So I know that in a couple of times in my life, I've had somebody picked up the phone, start yelling and screaming at me. And, the first thing you want to do is get defensive. And the next thing maybe you want to do is, retreat or fight back or something. And the best advice that I can give people when it comes to those situations, when they find themselves confronted with somebody that's engaging with them in that manner, is to become curious. Like, instantly become curious, and that will profoundly change your listening. So I get somebody yelling on the phone, and the first thing I need to do is step back, take a breath, and become curious. I've got to understand what that person is saying. And then I'm going to use skills such as paraphrasing that allows the other person to know that I am listening and that I'm understanding what they have to say.
De-escalating.
De-escalating, absolutely. I'm going to remain calm and reframe things for myself and the other person, and recognize. And I always go, John, to this place of, what is it that I want as the end result of the conversation, and then that will influence how I engage. So somebody's yelling at me, and what I want is, when the conversation is over, for them to be calm.
Great. And you, toward that end, and we always focus on verbal cues or what to say, but nonverbal communication is so essential, is it not?
It certainly can be, and of course, in the video world in which we find ourselves, we get a loss of nonverbal behavior. I mean, we certainly have all of the facial expressions,
right.
And in fact, one of the things I'll say, I think is helpful and non-verbally and such, is when people are standing, they're more likely to be expressive, with their hands, and more energized. So it's more likely, I think, that people's energy level will escalate, right? Their emotions will escalate. There's something beneficial to actually being in this chair. I'm planted in this chair. Mm-hmm. And so I'm more likely to remain calm. Again, certainly things like keeping our hand gestures quiet, not making any, physically never encroaching on somebody's space when we're in person, even when we're on this kind of a call, right? If we're in a critical, difficult conversation, I'm never going to come and zoom in literally on you.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I'm going to stay back. I'm going to try to remain relaxed about things. So what happens is, John, when we get attacked, we become very defensive in different ways.
Right.
And the funniest quick story is, I had this woman once. I was giving this talk, and she was a little bit nuts, and she did.
Is that a bias? She's a little nuts.
She was. I can say that as a clinician. And I don't understand why we have to be in this respect class. Why do we have to be respectful? I know that she was the reason we were there. And she comes up to me at the first break, and I have my arms crossed, and she goes, "You're so defensive. You don't even know what to say."
Yeah.
And I looked at her. I said, "Well, actually, I'm a little cold. I'm wondering if."
Yeah.
So part of that, John, is also be careful not to read too much. into it.
True. No, that's true. So, anyway, okay. You address the idea of personality types. Isn't that kind of a default, i.e., it's not my fault, or
Oh yeah.
how do you deal with that, Paul? So,
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of us, you say our personality is our personality. And I get that, especially when I have somebody who's a yeller, right? Somebody who likes to yell and scream, who either owns the company or is the president. And the word they always use is, I'm passionate. I'm passionate. That's my personality, right? I said, no, you're yelling and screaming, you're being a jerk.
yeah.
And so I think that people have to acknowledge, it's never about the intent, right? About what we say and do. It's always about the impact that we have on other people.
I didn't intend to offend you, Paul.
Right. That was not my intent. My intent was not to make you cry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for whatever reason, right? So when we really have to understand how our personality then leads to particular behaviors and words and such. And clearly, when you and I are speaking and we have similar kinds of personalities, those conversations tend to go just fine. But what if I am somebody who is a highly intense emotional person and dealing with somebody that's maybe more introverted or perhaps lacks some self-esteem and such? So one of the things I talk about in the book is, when you're dealing with people with different kinds of personalities, how should you adjust your style to have as productive conversations as possible?
Right. You made it very clear that when you go into a conversation, and if it's going to be a confrontational one, know the outcome. How do we want to end up? And I think my words, roadmap a critical conversation. Is it possible to relate those steps to us? So.
Well, I'll certainly give you the first step because I think this is the most important one. I'll let you. I'll start you there because I know we have only a few minutes. I think it's to start from the place of caring, and caring about the other person or caring about the relationship. And so, to put it in context a bit, so John, imagine that you and I are friends, and to say, and something's occurred, right? And something's occurred that's gotten me upset, and to say, John, our friendship really matters to me. I really value our friendship and what we've experienced over time. And it's for that reason that I want to share with you something that's really been on my mind that's come up, and just talk about it. And you can say that again with any team member or direct report, but come from the place of genuinely caring. And it's going to profoundly change your listening. You can, I think, tell anybody just about anything, including they have bad breath, if you come from it at a place of, I care about you as a human being.
That's good. I use the term affirmation in a manager to employee conversation. Affirm their value. So
yes.
But I like this stuff. I care about you. I like the friendship aspect. We've known each other or colleagues, whatever. That's a de-escalation before there's even an escalation. So
absolutely.
We are sadly coming to the end of our program, and I like to ask every guest an example of grace. And I know you have something to share with us. So
I think of grace as a gift. Right, as a gift. So on a personal level, meeting my fiance was just an accidental. It was a moment of grace. It was a gift, and in particular because I'd always wanted to be a dad, and she has 4 beautiful children, and so I have a remarkable relationship with each of those, and it's just the biggest blessing. And of course, with teenagers, at times you don't think of it that way, but it is.
It'll be a blessing later.
Yes. And I guess the other, professionally is, I was walking my dog one day, and 10 years ago, I guess it is, and the phone rang, and it was an editor from McGraw-Hill who said, we've read about you. We've read about the work that you've done in the area of respect and employee engagement. And would you be interested in writing a book? And
how many authors hate you right now, Paul?
so people ask me, so how do you get a major publishing deal? I go, I don't know, go for a walk with your dog. I don't know. But I realized how incredibly blessed I've been, and how blessed I've been with how it's sold around the world, and now over 500 straight weeks on Amazon. And I'm humbled by that, and I attribute it to respect matters. right? Respect matters to all of us in every culture. And that's because I think it communicates having value to your tribe. When you have value, you're protected. If you're not respected, you don't add value. So anyway, I do respect, John, because I believe it's the right thing to do. And also because I know it has a tremendously positive impact on organizations.
Great. And thank you. I appreciate those stories. And from what your conversation, your study of your study of respect and your practice of it, you are a man of grace. So thank you, Paul. And how can people find you? So
www.paulmarciano.com, paul@paulmarciano.com, or Twitter @therespectdoc.
Great. Okay. It's been a pleasure to have you. And with that, we're going to go out. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, John.